How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi, host of Tier Talk. And someone asked me a very unique question, and I'm going to try to answer it. He's one of our faithful viewers. And they asked me, Gange, what is the code of silence? What is the blue code? Covered this briefly in one of my episodes before. Very briefly. Because it's controversial. Because it's acknowledging that maybe something like that exists. And if it does, then why does it exist? And I think that would be the approach for the video. You know, not so much questioning its existence, but if it did, why would it exist? And there's a lot here that deals with group behavior and what would be considered group norms. So, with that in mind, today we're going to talk about the blue code, the code of silence. And maybe we can give people an understanding of what exactly it is. What does it mean? And it'd be great to get your comments on this as well, because this is just a dialogue that's going to come off the top of my head. So stand by for our sponsors. When we come back, we'll discuss the blue code.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it. It's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
Being a corrections officer takes its toll on even the strongest individuals. The constant need to perform at the highest level, putting your life at risk in a hostile environment, and the mental scarring of traumatic experiences. 31% of corrections officers show symptoms of PTSD, and 66% of people with PTSD also suffer with a substance abuse problem. The Transformations First Responders program is specially designed to help veterans and officers heal from the grips of addiction and PTSD in a comfortable, supportive, and serene setting. You are not alone. If you have questions about the services we offer, give us a call at 866-762-8454 to get more information on this affordable and life-changing program.
Thank you for listening to my sponsors. So this is a tough question, but it was asked from a very faithful viewer. So I want to give it a shot. The person's been listening to my show for many years now, and they have a question. I want to see if I can answer it. And I actually feel honored that they gave me the question. There's many other sources that they can give the question to, but they gave it to me, which means that they value my opinion. So hopefully I'm able to express some form of understanding as to what this term actually is. So when we're looking at the code of silence, the blue wall, the blue code, I read the definition of it. Now, the definition I'm not a big fan of. The definition of blue code or code of silence or the blue wall, whatever you want to call it, is a defense mechanism used by police to protect their own. And that definition to me is biased. It's biased, and it makes it look like that if there is a code that exists, that we use it to protect corruption. And I don't think that's the case. I've been in this field long enough, and I know for a fact 99% of us do the right thing, but it's that 1% that always gets generalized. And again, it's the extreme, and that's sad, because then we wind up getting defined by that extreme, and that's sad. So that definition right off the bat is biased and supports that extreme. So I disagree with that. I don't think that's a good definition. I think it's biased, and again, based on the extreme. I think a better definition would just be a little bit of a play on words here, but a defense mechanism employed by self to protect themselves. Now I'm going to get to that. So it's a defense mechanism employed by the individual to protect themselves. And that makes sense to me, and I'll explain why. So let me just go back and tell you a little story real quick. So I was hanging out with a good friend of mine, and she actually brought up this topic. And she kind of stands on one side, I kind of stand on the other on this topic. But she's very supportive of what we do, but you know, she has her belief and I have my belief. And it was a very good conversation. It was great because we're opened up to listen to each other's dialogue. And she kind of went with the former definition, which I mentioned, the protection of others, and I went with the latter, the protection of self. And she goes, well, explain that to me. She goes, well, first off, let me ask you, are you pro-cop? Are you pro-law enforcement? I said, well, what does that mean, pro-law enforcement? If doing the right thing makes me pro-law enforcement, then I guess I am. But I don't like the fact that we're using pro-law enforcement. It's very divisive. Very divisive. I don't like that term. I think I'm for the right thing. I'm for the right thing. And as I mentioned, 99% of the time, it is the right thing, and I'm for that right thing. But it doesn't mean I'm pro-law enforcement, because if I'm pro-law enforcement, that means I'm against something else. And I don't want to see us as being divisive. Everything we do is for the community. So if I'm pro-law enforcement, does that mean I'm against the community? What does that mean? What am I against? So again, I'm for the right thing. So the pro aspect I don't like. And she respected that. Like, you're saying I'm pro something means that I'm against something else, in my opinion. So she goes, well, what about the way you define it? And I said, okay, fine. So you define it as an action that's utilized by someone to protect another party. So a corrupt act, shut my mouth to it, didn't see nothing, cover the corruption. I disagree with that. If there is such thing as blue code or code of silence, I disagree with that definition. I think it's actually, as I mentioned, the latter, where we're looking to protect ourselves because we don't want to be social outcast. And that's a little bit different than the reasoning that you're putting behind why it's employed. So let's just go back to when we go into an academy. When we go into the academy, there's a bond that's created in that academy. And the academy, I mentioned this before in another show, but the bond is created out of an us versus them mentality. So the instructors, they drill at you aggressively, and they want you to have some form of animosity towards them. And they're hoping that by having that animosity, that it reinforces the bond that you guys share, the recruits. And actually, that's why I'm not a big fan of inmate boot camps. Because inmate boot camps can solidify and unite inmates that wouldn't normally be united. And I covered that in a show prior. But it does have some success rates. I'm just always thinking to the extreme. So same thing here. You got the academy. And then you have this us versus them mentality, which is good because it reinforces the bond that you and your peers, your fellow trainees are going to have. And you're going to take that bond with you out onto the streets or behind the wall. And that's great. Trust me, that's great because it's needed. If we see each other as family, it helps us, it motivates us to act when our family member's in need, or it should motivate us. And if it doesn't, then you're truly a coward, or somehow you separated yourself from that individual and you no longer see them as a family, which, that's a whole nother issue. But having said that, again, you're solidified as a family. That's how you leave the academy, and that's how you went to the workforce. And we hope we try to keep that bond throughout our time, serving in our careers. We want to keep that bond because, it motivates us. And it should motivate you. Now, when something goes wrong, that bond, it's got a bit of a con to it. Again, still need, don't get me wrong, but just an expression here, just an opinion. But that may make someone think twice about reporting a foolish act by a peer. And again, it's not because they're looking to protect that peer. They're not reporting it maybe because they're looking to protect themselves. And what I mean by that is they don't want to be seen as a social outcast within that group. Because again, we're talking about group behavior here, group dynamics. So the original definition of I'm not going to report it because I'm looking to protect the other person, I don't think that's the case. Because most of us, again, 99% of us, we do what's supposed to be done. If you're corrupt, I'm not going to support that. So I may not intentionally look to protect that. From the outside, they may see that because that's, for them, that's the norm and that's what they tend to believe. But that may not be the reason from the individual who chooses not to say anything. If the individual chooses not to say anything, it has nothing to do with that person wanting to protect the corrupt act, if there is a corrupt act. It's because the person doesn't want to be on the outside. And you got to realize something in this profession, being on the outside, it's dangerous. It's dangerous. Imagine you're got a code and you're involved and you're on the outside of those individuals who are going to come to respond, maybe they don't run as quick when it's your time to need help. But again, with that said, so I mentioned to my friend, I said, you know, you have to understand that, you know, especially from a psychological perspective, the person not wanting to report it may not be because they're looking to protect the act of corruption. Maybe because they're looking because they don't want to be a social outcast. But I must say something though. If the act is so extreme that the individual who witnesses it is able to separate that person doing the act from the group that they're in, well, then maybe they'll report it. Because the act is so extreme that separation's now in place, and in the mind the person can justify it. That person ain't family. That person's not family. Because if that person was family, they wouldn't be doing that. So that alone could motivate. But again, you got that bond. So that bond is very hard to overcome. So again, when we did this discussion, it's not so much to question the existence or not. It's maybe just to kind of look at why that code exists. And I'm sure that most people can look at this differently and say, wow, that makes sense. Am I saying it's right? No. I never said it was right. But if we're looking to address something, we need to actually know why it exists. And that definition that's out there about the code of blue exists only because it's used to protect others, I disagree with that. It's employed to protect yourself. To protect yourself from being a social outcast amongst your peers. And again, that deals with the bond that's created at the very beginning of your career, the family bond. You know, going against your own can be seen as very detrimental in your career. And there's that pressure that definitely makes it hard for you to do the right thing if need be. Again, that's why we develop laws like the Whistleblower Act. Because they know there could be pressure and they need to try to encourage individuals to do the right thing. But to automatically say that if there was a negative action and was covered up because this officer is just as corrupt, that's wrong. That's so wrong. It's not correct. It's because literally we don't want to be on the outside. It's survival. And I think that we don't want to be outside of the groups that we're the closest to. Because again, if you're creating us versus them mentality and, you know, and you have to report something, oh my God, you're on the outside. And now you're truly alone because of the us versus them mentality. But I think it was a good question. I made an attempt to answer it. Again, it's not a catch-all, but it's a different way of looking at why it exists. I don't know what the intent will be of what we can do with this information. But I think it cleans up a little bit of the negative that was automatically accompanied with that blue code as if we did it to protect corruption. And again, I think there's other reasons in play that are outside of us wanting to protect corrupt acts. I don't think that's the reason why it's employed, unless the person's involved in that corrupt act. But again, if there's a way for the individual to separate themselves, then they may report it. But they have to see that act as a true separation of that bond that we share. Like again, if an officer brings in contraband to the facility, we report that. We report that immediately because you broke that bond of trust between me and you. And you're giving that inmate leverage. Now that leverage can be used against me. So automatically, I have no problem taking that to that next level. Because you did it to yourself. You separated yourself from us the moment you brought that contraband in. But it may become a little bit different if there's an action that is still supported within the group. And I'm not going to spell out what that action is. You guys are going to have to figure out that action on your own. Because I don't want this vlog to be taken the wrong way. But if there's still an action that may be seen as beneficial to the group that doesn't really employ any form of separation, that becomes a little bit harder now for that officer to step forward, because they're not able to separate themselves, and if they do, it's going to make it seem like they're choosing one side over the other. And that, again, could be the peer pressure. But it could only take one person to support that individual in coming forward, and then the person may do so. It only take one person. But with that said, again, that deals with conformity too. That deals with conformity. One person could change everything around. One person that supports you can change everything around. But ultimately, I guess the main part of this argument was why it's employed. And I don't think, if there is a code of silence, I don't think it's employed to protect corruption. I think it's employed because someone doesn't want to be seen as a social outcast. And it also deals on another level is it's easier to report when you see the actions as not beneficial to the group. And again, that's subjective in your perspective. But if you see the actions as being beneficial to the group, even though that those actions may not be deemed proper or professional, it may be harder for you to step away because that person has not separated themselves in their actions. So, again, just a thought. Thought it was interesting. And I wanted to give it to our viewer because he's loyal. As always, love you guys. The show is Tear Talk. Please like, subscribe, interact, engage, and add your comments to this. I'm curious about this. I'm curious about what you guys think about what I said. I know I'm not 100%, but it's a unique thought. Why not? And as always, guys, love you guys. Stay safe.